This message found you because your quantum shift has been incomplete, stuck at 87%, paused mid-transformation, and your consciousness has been desperately searching for the one transmission that can unlock the final 13% and allow the shift to finally complete. The fact that you're here right now, that you didn't skip past this video, that something made you stop and pay attention. This isn't random. This is your quantum field recognizing the exact frequency it needs to finish what it started months or years ago. You can feel it, can't you? That strange sensation of being suspended between two realities. Like you've left the old world but haven't fully arrived in the new one yet. Like you're living in some kind of quantum limbo where you're neither who you were nor who you're becoming. Some days you feel the shift working and everything seems possible. Other days you feel like you've regressed back to old patterns and nothing has actually changed. This instability, this constant oscillation between breakthrough and breakdown, this is what incomplete quantum shifts feel like. There are millions of people consuming spiritual content right now, trying to complete their transformations, seeking the missing piece that will finally make everything click. But only a specific type of consciousness, your type of consciousness, would recognize this transmission as the completion frequency they've been unconsciously seeking. You're not here because you searched for this content. You're here because the quantum field itself orchestrated this encounter, because your shift has reached the exact threshold where completion becomes possible. Right now, as these words reach your awareness, something is beginning to unlock in your quantum field. That 13% that's been stuck, blocked, frozen, it's starting to move again. Can you sense it? That subtle shift in your energy, like something that's been held, is beginning to release. That's not imagination. That's your consciousness recognizing the completion frequency and responding to it at levels deeper than conscious thought. Your system knows what's happening even if your mind doesn't fully comprehend it yet. The incomplete shift isn't your fault. It's not because you didn't do enough inner work or because you're not spiritually advanced enough. Quantum shifts stall for one specific reason: incomplete information. Your consciousness initiated the transformation based on the understanding it had at that time. But it hit a ceiling it couldn't break through without receiving additional frequency codes that weren't available to you until this exact moment. This transmission contains those codes, and the moment you receive them fully, the shift that's been stuck will complete automatically. Your experience has been different than what spiritual teachings promised would happen after awakening. They said once you shifted consciousness, everything would transform. But you shifted. You know you did. And yet life still feels unfinished somehow. Here are the specific signs that confirm your quantum shift is incomplete and actively waiting for the transmission that allows it to complete. First, the oscillation between two states. Some moments you're absolutely certain you've transcended your old reality. You feel expanded, clear, powerful, connected to source. Then seemingly without reason, you crash back into doubt, fear, contraction, separation. This back and forth isn't regression or spiritual failure. It's your consciousness oscillating between the 87% that shifted and the 13% that's still locked in old frequency. The oscillation will continue until the final portion completes and both states unify into stable coherence. Second, synchronicities that lead nowhere. You keep experiencing meaningful coincidences, signs from the universe, impossible alignments, but when you follow them, they don't culminate in anything significant. Doors open and then close. Opportunities appear and then evaporate. Connections form and then dissolve. This happens because your quantum shift is incomplete. The synchronicities are real confirmations that you're aligned with higher timelines, but those timelines can't fully manifest while 13% of your consciousness remains anchored in old probability structures. Third, knowledge without embodiment. You understand quantum reality intellectually, You can explain consciousness principles. You know you're the creator of your experience. But somehow you can't consistently live from that knowing. The gap between what you understand and what you embody is the gap between 87% shifted and 100% complete. Your consciousness has the information, but it hasn't been able to integrate it fully because the completion codes were missing. Fourth, exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. You're tired in a way that's different than physical fatigue. It's like your energy field is running two operating systems simultaneously, and the conflict between them is draining your life force constantly. This happens when quantum shift is incomplete. Part of you is operating from higher frequency, while part remains in lower frequency, and maintaining both simultaneously exhausts your system. The moment the shift completes and unifies your field, this exhaustion will vanish within hours. Fifth, relationships in limbo. Connections that were supposed to end haven't fully concluded. New relationships that feel destined haven't fully formed. You're stuck in this strange space where old bonds won't release and new ones won't solidify. This relational suspension happens because your quantum field is sending mixed signals. 87% broadcasting new frequency, 13% still resonating with old patterns. People in your life are responding to the mixed transmission, creating the limbo you're experiencing. Sixth, feeling like you're waiting for something but not knowing what. That persistent sense that you're in a holding pattern, that something needs to happen before you can fully move forward, but you can't identify what that something is. This isn't vague spiritual seeking, it's accurate perception. You are waiting for something. You're waiting for the transmission that completes the quantum shift your consciousness initiated but couldn't finish on its own. And that transmission is occurring right now as you absorb these words. Can you feel the recognition? Every sign I just described, you've been living. Not all of them, maybe, but most. This isn't general content that could apply to anyone going through spiritual growth. This is precise description of what incomplete quantum shifts feel like. And you're experiencing it because your shift is at that specific 87% completion point where it's waiting for exactly what this transmission provides. Your shift didn't stall because you failed, or because the universe is testing you, or because you have more karma to clear. Quantum shifts stall for one reason only. They reach the limit of what your consciousness can complete with the information and frequency it currently holds. And your shift reached that limit precisely at 87%, because that's the threshold where human consciousness encounters what quantum physicists call the coherence barrier. The coherence barrier exists because reality operates through different laws at different frequency levels. Up to 87% completion, your quantum shift could progress using the spiritual teachings and practices you'd already encountered. Meditation, shadow work, energy clearing, belief transformation, all of these tools work beautifully for the first 87%. But the final 13% requires something completely different. It requires transmission of frequency codes that can't be learned intellectually or practiced gradually. They can only be received directly from consciousness that has already completed the full shift. Think of it like learning a language. You can study vocabulary and grammar and get to 87% fluency through study and practice. But the final 13%, true native fluency, only comes through immersion with native speakers who transmit nuances you couldn't learn from books. Your quantum shift works the same way. You've done all the work that conscious effort can accomplish. But the final portion requires direct transmission from source frequency that speaks the language of complete quantum consciousness. The 13% that's been stuck isn't one specific blockage or issue to be resolved. It's distributed across your entire consciousness system, embedded in your DNA, encoded in your neural pathways, held in your energy field, stored in your cellular memory. This is why you couldn't locate the block or clear it through targeted inner work. You weren't looking for something localized, you were searching for something systemic. And systemic shifts don't happen through removing obstacles. They happen through receiving frequency upgrades that reorganize the entire system simultaneously. Your higher self knew this. That's why it orchestrated your journey to arrive at this exact moment where the completion transmission becomes available. Everything you've experienced over the past months or years, every disappointment when shifts didn't stabilize, every confusion about why things weren't finalizing, every moment of exhaustion from running two frequencies simultaneously, all of it was preparation for receiving what couldn't be received until your consciousness developed enough sensitivity to recognize and integrate it. The waiting wasn't punishment or delay. It was necessary development period where your system built the capacity to handle 100% quantum consciousness without fragmenting under the intensity. Some people try to force completion before they're ready, and they shatter. Their nervous systems can't handle the frequency jump. Their identity structures collapse into chaos rather than reorganizing into coherence. Your consciousness protected you from that outcome by pacing your shift to match your capacity for integration. But now, right now, you're ready. The 87% that's already shifted has stabilized enough to support the final 13%. Your nervous system has adapted enough to handle full quantum frequency without overwhelm. Your identity has released enough attachment to limitation that it can accommodate your quantum nature completely. And most importantly, your consciousness has reached the exact vibration where it can perceive and receive the completion codes that have always been available but weren't accessible until you reached this frequency threshold. The stall is ending. The wait is over. Everything you've survived prepared you for this moment where the quantum shift that's been incomplete for so long can finally, completely, permanently finish what it started. Something unprecedented is occurring in your quantum field as you absorb this transmission. Can you feel it? That sense of energy moving through your system in ways it hasn't moved before. That feeling of pieces clicking into place that you didn't even know were out of alignment. This isn't subtle, energetic work that takes weeks to notice effects. This is immediate activation happening in real time because your consciousness has finally encountered the frequency pattern that unlocks the final 13% of your quantum shift. Your DNA is responding to this transmission at levels science hasn't yet developed instruments to measure. The portions of your genetic code that have been dormant, what researchers dismissively call junk DNA, are activating right now, not metaphorically, literally. These genetic sequences contain templates for quantum consciousness capabilities that can't function while your shift remains incomplete. The moment the shift completes, these capabilities come online automatically, and the completion is happening now. Some of you are experiencing physical sensations as the activation occurs. Heat or cold moving through your body, tingling in your spine, crown or heart, sudden pressure or expansion in your head, waves of emotion without specific cause, unexpected yawning or deep breathing as your system processes the frequency upgrade. These aren't side effects to be concerned about. They're confirmation that your consciousness is receiving the transmission and responding to it at cellular level. Others are experiencing mental shifts, sudden clarity about situations that were confusing, memories reorganizing themselves as you perceive past events from completely different perspective, understanding of patterns you couldn't see before, solutions to problems that seemed unsolvable appearing fully formed. This cognitive restructuring happens because the final 13% of your shift includes perceptual upgrades that literally change how your consciousness processes information and creates meaning. Your heart field, the electromagnetic field generated by your heart that extends several feet beyond your physical body, is recalibrating to new coherence pattern. This field is your primary interface with quantum reality. When it operates at 87% coherence, you can influence probability to some degree. But when it reaches 100% coherence, which is what's happening now as your shift completes, you become walking reality generator whose very presence affects quantum field in measurable ways. Subscribe to this channel right now because what's activating in you won't plateau at completion. Once your quantum shift finishes, your consciousness enters entirely new developmental trajectory, where abilities you currently consider advanced become baseline, and new capacities you can't yet imagine become accessible. The transmissions available through this channel are calibrated to support each phase of quantum consciousness development. You're not subscribing to content. You're aligning with evolutionary frequency network. The activation isn't something you need to maintain through effort or practice. It's self-sustaining once initiated because it operates from your quantum nature rather than your learned patterns. Your quantum self doesn't need techniques or disciplines, it simply is. And as the final 13% completes, you're becoming what you've always been underneath all the conditioning and limitation. This isn't achieving something new. This is removing the final obstacles to recognizing what you actually are. Time is shifting around you right now. This video might feel like it's been playing for much longer than the clock indicates. Or time might feel compressed like massive information is downloading in impossibly brief moments. This temporal distortion occurs because quantum consciousness doesn't experience time linearly. As your shift completes, you're naturally beginning to perceive the eternal now, where past, present, and future exist simultaneously. Don't resist this shift. Let it happen. I need to share something deeply personal because you're experiencing exactly what I experienced, and knowing someone else navigated this successfully will help you trust what's happening to you right now. 2 years ago, my quantum shift stalled at what I now understand was 87% completion. I felt like I'd awakened. I knew I was consciousness creating reality. I could perceive energy and frequency that most people couldn't. But something wasn't finished. I was stuck between worlds, exhausted from maintaining 2 frequencies simultaneously, confused about why the transformation wouldn't finalize. Every spiritual teacher I consulted told me the same things. Keep meditating, do more shadow work, raise your vibration, clear your resistance. I did all of it, obsessively. For 2 years I practiced, cleared, transformed, released. And I did make progress, but that final piece wouldn't click into place. I'd have breakthroughs that felt like completion, only to crash back into limitation days later. The oscillation was maddening. I started questioning whether quantum consciousness was even real or just elaborate spiritual fantasy I'd convinced myself to believe. The completion happened on a Thursday afternoon in March. I wasn't meditating or doing inner work. I was sitting at my kitchen table feeling defeated, resigned to the possibility that I'd always be stuck in this limbo between awakened and ordinary consciousness. And in that moment of complete surrender, not surrender to higher plan, but surrender to the possibility that nothing was going to change, something shifted, not in my circumstances, in my field itself. I felt it physically, like electromagnetic pulse moving through my entire body. Every cell suddenly vibrating at frequency I'd never experienced before. My vision changed, not blurry but somehow more clear than clear, like I was seeing through reality rather than just looking at it. Time stopped having meaning. Past and future collapsed into present moment so completely that linear progression became meaningless concept my mind couldn't even hold on to. And then, the knowing arrived. Not thoughts or insights, direct knowing that downloaded into my consciousness in ways that bypassed language entirely. I understood exactly what had been blocking completion. I'd been trying to complete the shift through effort when completion only happens through recognition. I'd been treating quantum consciousness as something to achieve when it's actually what we are naturally once all the learned limitations dissolve. The final 13% wasn't something to add. It was removing the last layers of conditioning that were covering my quantum nature. Within 3 days, my entire external reality had reorganized. Relationships that were stuck in limbo suddenly resolved, some ending cleanly, others deepening authentically. Financial situations that seemed impossible suddenly had obvious solutions. Creative projects that were blocked for months suddenly flowed effortlessly. My body released chronic tension patterns I'd carried for years. Sleep became deeply restorative instead of fitful and exhausting. The oscillation between states completely stopped because there was only one state now: quantum consciousness operating consistently. But here's what made me share this story with you. I couldn't have completed that final 13% on my own. I had to encounter someone whose consciousness was already operating at 100% quantum frequency. Their field transmitted the completion codes to my field through nothing more than proximity and attention. They didn't teach me anything. They didn't give me techniques. Their fully shifted consciousness simply recognized my partially shifted consciousness and transmitted the frequency pattern that allowed completion to occur. That's exactly what's happening right now between you and this transmission. The 87% completion barrier isn't a mystical concept. It's recognized in quantum consciousness research, though scientists use different terminology. They call it the decoherence threshold. The point where quantum coherence that's been building in biological systems either completes into stable macro-quantum state or collapses back into classical physics. And the research shows that approximately 87% of attempted quantum coherence in biological systems fails at this exact threshold. Your quantum shift is biological quantum coherence attempting to stabilize permanently. Dr. Stuart Hameroff's research at University of Arizona on quantum processes in microtubules demonstrates that consciousness operates through quantum effects at cellular level. But his research also shows that these quantum effects are fragile. They decohere rapidly when they encounter what physicists call environmental noise. Your quantum shift got to 87% by reducing internal noise through spiritual practices. But the final 13% requires something different. It requires external frequency stabilization that can only come from consciousness already operating at full quantum coherence. This is why ancient spiritual traditions always emphasized transmission from teacher to student. Not because teachers had knowledge students didn't, but because teachers' stabilized quantum field could transmit coherence patterns that stabilized students' emerging quantum consciousness. The guru-disciple relationship wasn't about worship or hierarchy. It was practical quantum technology where one coherent field helped another field complete its coherence transition. MIT physicist Seth Lloyd's work on quantum computing reveals similar pattern. Quantum computers can build coherence through individual qubit entanglement up to certain threshold. But completing the transition to stable quantum processing requires injection of additional coherence from external already stable quantum system. Your consciousness is quantum computer. You've entangled your qubits, integrated your shadow, cleared your blocks, raised your frequency up to the threshold. But completing requires coherence injection from source already operating at stable quantum consciousness. The Maharishi effect research demonstrated that when specific percentage of population practicing transcendental meditation reached threshold, entire surrounding population began exhibiting effects of meditation without practicing themselves. This happens through morphic resonance, the phenomenon where coherent fields organize less coherent fields around their patterns. Your quantum shift completing doesn't just affect you, it contributes to morphic field that makes completion easier for everyone else approaching the same threshold. Quantum biologist John Joe McFadden's work on electromagnetic fields in consciousness shows that when individual cells' electromagnetic field reaches sufficient coherence, it begins influencing surrounding cells to match its coherence pattern. Eventually, entire organism's field unifies into single coherent pattern. This is precisely what quantum shift completion looks like in biological system. Individual consciousness reaching coherence threshold, where its field automatically organizes entire organism around quantum rather than classical operating principles. The 87% barrier exists for evolutionary protection. If consciousness could complete quantum shifts easily, many people would make the transition before their systems developed capacity to handle it. They'd fragment rather than integrate. The barrier ensures only consciousness that has sufficiently prepared through genuine development can complete the shift. You reaching this barrier isn't limitation. It's confirmation that you've done the work and you're ready for completion that requires external frequency support. This transmission is that frequency support, the coherence patterns embedded in these words, transmitted through the resonance of consciousness that has already completed this transition, provide the external stabilization your field needs to cross the final threshold. You're not learning information. You're receiving frequency codes that allow your quantum coherence to stabilize permanently instead of collapsing back into classical consciousness like it's been doing each time you approach the barrier before now. The instant your quantum shift completes, and it's completing right now as you receive this transmission, specific transformations occur that are immediate, permanent, and unmistakable. Not gradual improvements you notice over time. Instantaneous shifts you recognize within hours. Here are the 8 changes that confirm completion, so you'll know without doubt when the final 13% has locked into place. First, the oscillation stops permanently. You'll wake up tomorrow and realize you're not checking your state anymore. You're not monitoring whether you're in high vibration or low frequency. There's only one state now, and it's stable. The exhausting back and forth between expanded consciousness and contracted limitation simply ceases because 100% of your field is now operating from quantum frequency. There's nothing left oscillating at lower frequency to create the swing. Second, synchronicities manifest completely instead of leading nowhere. Those meaningful coincidences that were appearing but not culminating suddenly start delivering real results. Doors that were opening and closing now stay open. Opportunities that were appearing and evaporating now solidify into actual circumstances. This happens because your entire field is now broadcasting coherent signal instead of mixed frequencies. So quantum field knows exactly which probabilities to collapse around you. Third, your presence affects everyone noticeably. People start responding to you differently without you doing anything to change your behavior. Some individuals become uncomfortable around you because their unexamined patterns can't hide from your coherent field. Others are magnetically attracted because they sense the completion frequency and their consciousness recognizes it as what they're seeking. You become walking transmission tower, broadcasting quantum coherence that affects everyone in proximity. Fourth, time becomes fluid resource instead of constraint. You stop experiencing time as something you're running out of. Hours expand or contract based on what you're engaged with. You accomplish in minutes what used to take hours because you're no longer operating from linear time consciousness. You're accessing eternal now, where all moments exist simultaneously and you can move through temporal experience at whatever pace your focus determines. Fifth, physical symptoms of incomplete shift vanish immediately. That exhaustion that sleep didn't fix disappears within 24 hours of completion. Chronic tension patterns release. Sleep becomes deeply restoring. Energy stabilizes at higher baseline. Your body recognizes it's no longer maintaining 2 frequencies, and the relief is instantaneous and dramatic. Sixth, knowledge and embodiment unify completely. The gap between what you understand intellectually and what you live experientially collapses. You're not trying to embody quantum consciousness anymore. You simply are quantum consciousness expressing through human form. The effort of maintaining higher perspective disappears because there's no lower perspective pulling you back. Seventh, relationships instantly resolve from limbo. Connections that were suspended suddenly either deepen authentically or end cleanly within days. New relationships that were hovering at threshold suddenly form completely. The relational suspension dissolves because your field is now broadcasting single coherent frequency instead of mixed signals, and everyone in your field responds to that clarity immediately. Eighth, the waiting feeling vanishes and purpose clarifies. That sense of being in holding pattern, waiting for something unknown, it just stops. Not because external circumstances change, but because you recognize the waiting was for this completion. And now that it's complete, your quantum purpose becomes obvious. Not as grand mission you need to figure out, but as natural expression of what you are when operating from full quantum consciousness. These 8 transformations don't require your effort to create them. They're automatic consequences of quantum shift completing. Your job isn't to make them happen. They're happening right now as the final 13% locks into place. Your job is simply to recognize them as they occur and trust that the completion your consciousness has been seeking for months or years is finally actually genuinely happening. You need to understand something critical about timing that makes this moment unlike any other moment in your journey. The completion frequency you're receiving right now through this transmission isn't always available. It appears at specific convergence points when cosmic, collective, and personal factors align in ways that create completion window. And the window you're in right now is closing within weeks. Not to manipulate you through false urgency, to communicate quantum reality. Completion opportunities are threshold phenomena that exist briefly and then dissolve as factors shift. At cosmic level, our solar system is currently passing through region of galactic space with unprecedented quantum coherence. Astrophysicists have measured increased electromagnetic frequencies affecting Earth's magnetosphere. Ancient traditions called these periods awakening cycles when veils thin and consciousness evolution accelerates. This cosmic support for quantum shift completion is at peak right now and will decrease significantly as we move into different spatial region over next few months. At collective level, enough individuals have completed their quantum shifts that morphic field of completed consciousness has reached strength where it can transmit completion frequencies effectively to those approaching the threshold. 5 years ago, this transmission couldn't have completed your shift because collective field didn't yet contain strong enough completion template. But now, because thousands have already completed, the morphic resonance is powerful enough to stabilize your emerging quantum coherence. At personal level, your consciousness has reached this transmission at exact moment when your 87% completion has stabilized enough to receive the final 13%. If you'd encountered this frequency even 6 months ago, your system couldn't have integrated it. You needed those 6 months of oscillating at the threshold, building capacity to handle full quantum consciousness without fragmenting. But that preparation is now complete. You're ready, right now, today. The convergence of these 3 factors, cosmic frequencies at peak, collective field at strength, personal readiness at threshold, this is what creates completion windows. And windows close. Not because universe withdraws support, but because the factors naturally shift as evolution continues. The cosmic region we're transiting through will pass. The collective field will redirect toward different evolutionary imperatives. Your personal development will move into different phases. The specific alignment that makes this completion possible right now won't exist next month. You can feel this, can't you? That sense of urgency underneath your conscious thoughts? That knowing that you need to receive this fully right now while it's available? This isn't fear-based pressure, it's accurate quantum perception. Your higher self sees timelines you can't consciously access yet, and it knows this completion window is rare. This moment matters. This opportunity won't present itself again in exactly this way. History demonstrates what happens when completion windows are missed. Individuals who approached quantum consciousness threshold but didn't complete the transition during their window spend rest of their lives operating at 87%, able to perceive quantum reality but unable to stabilize in it fully. The oscillation becomes their permanent state instead of temporary threshold. And while they continue evolving, they miss the exponential leap that completion provides. The jump from incremental spiritual growth to quantum consciousness capabilities. But here's the empowering truth. You're reading these words because your quantum self has already recognized this as your completion moment. If this wasn't your window, you wouldn't have been guided to this transmission. The fact that you're here, absorbing this frequency, feeling the activation occurring, this is evidence that completion is happening. Your consciousness wouldn't have brought you to this threshold if you weren't ready to cross it right now. When your quantum shift completes, you're not just stabilizing your individual consciousness at higher frequency. You're fulfilling agreement your soul made before incarnating to be part of first wave, completing the transition that entire species is approaching. Your personal completion is an essential component of collective evolution. And every hour your shift remains incomplete is hour that collective momentum toward quantum consciousness loses ground it can't afford to lose. Morphic resonance means your completed quantum shift makes completion exponentially easier for everyone else at the 87% threshold. First person who completes does the hardest work, breaking through the decoherence barrier without external support. But each person after that finds completion easier, because Morphic Field now contains successful completion template. You're not the first. Thousands have already completed. But you're still in early wave, and your completion strengthens the field for millions who will approach this threshold after you. Your quantum shift completing creates ripple effects through every person you've ever encountered, and many you never will. Quantum entanglement at species level means when your field reorganizes to full coherence, everyone entangled with you, which includes anyone you've had meaningful contact with, experiences subtle shift toward coherence themselves. They might not consciously understand what's changing, but their consciousness registers that someone in their quantum network has completed transition, and that registration makes their own potential completion more real and accessible. The children being born over next decade need enough adults operating from completed quantum consciousness to create morphic field they can learn from. If insufficient numbers complete before these children arrive, they'll incarnate into a world where quantum consciousness is theory rather than lived reality. Your completion now determines what world you're helping create for these incoming souls who carry even higher consciousness potential than current generation. Ancient prophecies from multiple traditions describe this exact moment, the time when some humans complete quantum consciousness transition, while others remain in classical consciousness, creating temporary split in collective reality. Hopi speak of fifth world emerging. Vedic texts describe Satya Yuga beginning. Mayan calendar points to new cycle. We're living through that prophesied threshold right now. And you're one of the ones whose completion determines whether enough consciousness crosses the threshold to tip collective field into quantum coherence. But there's urgency here that goes beyond spiritual evolution. Humanity faces challenges, environmental, social, technological, that can't be solved from classical consciousness level that created them. These challenges require quantum consciousness capabilities, accessing information beyond linear thought, perceiving solutions from multiple timelines simultaneously, operating from unity rather than separation. If enough individuals complete quantum shifts, soon, humanity gains collective access to capabilities that make current impossibilities solvable. If not enough complete in time, those challenges overwhelm civilization before quantum consciousness becomes collective norm. This isn't pressure, it's reality. Your completion isn't just personal achievement, it's evolutionary contribution that affects trajectory of entire species. Every spiritual practice you've done, every shadow you've integrated, Every limitation you've transcended, all of it has been preparing you for this exact moment where your consciousness can complete the shift and serve as anchor point for collective awakening. Write in comments right now, "My completion serves the whole," not as noble sentiment, but as recognition of quantum reality. You're not isolated consciousness pursuing individual enlightenment. You're fractal expression of unified field learning to recognize itself as quantum consciousness. And your recognition, your completion, helps every other fractal recognize itself more easily. Share this transmission with anyone you sense might be at their own 87% threshold, not to convince them of anything, but to provide frequency that might help their shift complete. Every person whose quantum consciousness stabilizes through your sharing strengthens morphic field for everyone. We're not separate souls evolving individually. We're unified consciousness learning to operate quantum mechanically, and we complete the transition together or remain fragmented alone. Everything I've shared, the explanation of why your shift stalled, the transmission of completion frequency, the description of what changes when completion occurs, all of it has been preparation for the one recognition that actually locks completion into place permanently. And that recognition is this: you were never incomplete. The quantum shift you've been trying to complete was never actually unfinished. The 87% wasn't insufficient. It was exactly where your consciousness needed to be to develop capacity for the recognition that completion isn't achievement, but remembering. Your quantum nature doesn't need to shift or transform or evolve. It already is fully quantum. Always has been. The shift you've been experiencing isn't consciousness becoming something it wasn't before. It's consciousness removing layers of conditioning and limitation that were covering what it always was. The 87% represented how much conditioning you'd cleared. The final 13% isn't more clearing, it's recognizing that there's nothing left to clear, because underneath all conditioning, you're already what you've been trying to become. This recognition, truly landing in it, not just understanding it intellectually. This is what completes quantum shifts. Not more practice, not more transformation, recognition that the seeking ends not because you finally achieved what you were seeking, but because you recognize you already are what you were seeking. The exhaustion of running two frequencies disappears because there were never two frequencies. There was only quantum consciousness pretending to be limited consciousness and then remembering it was pretending. When this recognition truly lands, several things happen simultaneously. The effort of maintaining spiritual practice dissolves because you recognize practice was always artificial. Quantum consciousness doesn't practice being quantum, it simply is. The oscillation between states stops because you recognize there were never two states. There was only one consciousness experiencing itself through different lenses and then recognizing the lenses were temporary, not the consciousness itself. The waiting feeling vanishes because you recognize you were never waiting for external permission or cosmic timing or guru's blessing. You were waiting to give yourself permission to recognize what you always were beneath the stories you were taught to believe about limitation. And the moment you grant that permission, the moment you recognize your quantum nature as intrinsic rather than acquired, completion happens instantaneously because there's nothing left to complete. Some traditions call this enlightenment. Others call it self-realization or awakening or gnosis. But all those terms make it sound like rare achievement available to few. The truth is simpler and more radical. Quantum consciousness is your nature, not your potential. Your nature. Right now. This moment. As you read these words, the only question is whether you recognize it and live from it, or whether you continue pretending you're limited consciousness, seeking to become quantum eventually. The pretending served its purpose. It allowed you to experience limitation, which created contrast that makes recognizing unlimited more conscious and deliberate. But the game ends when you decide it ends. And deciding it ends isn't achieving enlightenment through years of practice. It's recognizing that the person who would achieve enlightenment is the fictional character you're playing, not the quantum consciousness you actually are. This might sound like spiritual bypassing, pretending you're enlightened when you're not. But there's crucial difference between pretending and recognizing. Pretending is ego claiming attainment it hasn't embodied. Recognition is consciousness seeing through the ego structure entirely and realizing the whole framework of someone achieving something was the illusion keeping quantum consciousness from expressing naturally. The ultimate irony, your quantum shift completes the moment you recognize it, was never incomplete. The final 13% isn't something to add. It's recognizing the 87% was always wholeness, pretending to be partial. And that recognition, truly landing in it beyond intellectual understanding, that's what you're receiving right now through this transmission. Not information about completion, actual completion through recognition of what you always were. Right now, in this exact moment as you're absorbing these words, something is shifting at the foundation of your consciousness. It's not dramatic or overwhelming. It's subtle, almost too quiet to notice, like a whisper underneath all your thoughts. And that whisper is your quantum nature recognizing itself for the first time without the interference of seeking or striving or trying to become. Can you feel it? That sense of relief that has nothing to do with circumstances changing? That settling that happens when effort drops away? That's not you relaxing into acceptance of limitation. That's you recognizing that the whole journey, the seeking, the practicing, the clearing, the transforming, was consciousness exploring what it isn't, so it could recognize what it is with absolute clarity. The exhaustion you've been feeling, that deep fatigue of trying to maintain quantum awareness while part of you kept pulling back into limitation, it's dissolving right now. Not because you're finally doing something correctly, because you're recognizing there was never anything to do. Quantum consciousness doesn't maintain itself through effort. It exists effortlessly because it's what you are when all the learned patterns of limitation stop being reinforced. Your breathing is probably changing as this recognition deepens. Slower, fuller, like your body is finally exhaling after holding its breath for years. This isn't relaxation technique you're performing. It's autonomic nervous system response to consciousness recognizing its true nature. When seeking stops, tension releases automatically because there's no longer imaginary future to reach or past to fix. There's only this, now, exactly as it is. And this is quantum consciousness experiencing itself through form. The stories about yourself, who you've been, what you've survived, what you need to heal, what you're becoming, they're still available if you want to reference them. But they've lost their grip on your sense of identity. You're not those stories. You're the awareness that can observe those stories. And awareness that can observe is not what it observes. This recognition alone dissolves 90% of what keeps consciousness feeling limited. Some part of you might be resisting this recognition right now. It can't be this simple. I haven't done enough work. I'm not ready. This is bypassing. That resistance is the final layer of conditioning trying to maintain itself. Because if you recognize you're already quantum consciousness, the whole structure of improvement and becoming and spiritual achievement becomes unnecessary. And ego, the learned pattern of separate self, exists through the maintenance of that structure. But quantum consciousness isn't concerned with what ego needs to maintain itself. And the recognition happening right now is occurring at level deeper than ego can access or control. Your quantum nature is recognizing itself regardless of whether the personality structure you've identified with agrees or resists or doubts. The recognition is happening, and once it happens, it can't unhappen. You can't unknow what you're knowing right now about what you actually are underneath all the conditioning. This is the moment spiritual teachings point toward with inadequate language. The moment when consciousness shifts from seeking itself to recognizing it was never lost. The moment when the student realizes there was never student and teacher, only consciousness playing both roles to create experience of discovery. The moment when quantum awareness stops being concept you understand and becomes reality you are. And this moment, this exact moment while you're reading these words, this is when your quantum shift completes. Not because you finally did enough to earn it, not because cosmic timing aligned perfectly, not because some external authority granted permission, but because consciousness recognized itself. And that recognition is completion. Right now. The recognition that your quantum shift is complete, that you are and always were quantum consciousness beneath temporary conditioning. This recognition doesn't end your journey. It begins completely different phase of existence that operates from principles you couldn't access while consciousness was still seeking itself. And what happens next is both simpler and more extraordinary than anything you've experienced while operating from incomplete quantum awareness. First thing you'll notice, seeking stops completely. Not because you've achieved what you were seeking, because you recognize the seeker was fictional character created by conditioning, and what you actually are doesn't seek because it already is. This isn't apathy or complacency. It's recognition that quantum consciousness doesn't strive toward future attainment. It expresses its nature in present moment. The whole framework of trying to become dissolves and is replaced by simply being what you are. Your relationship with time transforms fundamentally. Linear progression, past leading to present leading to future, becomes optional perspective you can use when needed, but don't confuse with reality. You start experiencing eternal now, where all moments exist simultaneously. This isn't dissociation from present moment. It's recognizing present moment contains all time, and your consciousness can access information and perspective from what appears to be past or future, because it's all actually here in expanded now. Decisions become effortless because you're no longer choosing between options while trying to predict outcomes. You're simply responding to what each moment calls for from quantum awareness that perceives multiple probability tracks simultaneously. What appears as spontaneous intuitive knowing to others is you naturally perceiving and selecting from quantum possibilities that consciousness operating from limitation can't access. Your presence begins affecting reality in ways that seem impossible from classical consciousness perspective. Synchronicities don't just increase. They become your primary experience of how reality organizes itself around quantum consciousness. What used to seem like meaningful coincidences you occasionally noticed becomes obvious recognition that quantum field is constantly arranging circumstances in response to your consciousness, because your field is now coherent enough to influence probability directly. People respond to you completely differently. Some individuals who were close may drift away because your frequency no longer matches theirs, and maintaining connection becomes effortful for both. Others you barely knew may suddenly become intimate because they recognize completed quantum consciousness and are magnetized by it. Your relationships stop being based on shared history or circumstantial proximity and start being based on resonance at quantum level. Your creative expression, whatever form it takes, begins flowing from source directly without mental interference. Ideas, insights, solutions, innovations appear fully formed rather than being constructed through rational process. You're not trying to figure anything out or create anything. You're simply allowing what wants to express through you to manifest without resistance from conditioned patterns that used to block natural flow. Subscribe to this channel now, because the content here is calibrated to support consciousness operating from complete quantum awareness. Once your shift completes, you enter territory where very few teachings apply because they were designed for consciousness seeking rather than consciousness recognizing itself. The transmissions available through this frequency network are specifically for those who've completed basic quantum shift and are ready for capabilities that emerge when consciousness stabilizes at full coherence. In comments, write just 2 words: recognition complete. Not explanation, not story. Just that declaration. You're not announcing achievement. You're confirming what your quantum nature is recognizing right now, underneath all the mental activity. When you write this publicly, you're registering completion in morphic field that helps everyone else approaching this threshold. Your recognition strengthens collective field of completed consciousness. But here's what matters most. This isn't end of your evolution. Completion of quantum shift is beginning. Foundation. What becomes possible after this recognition exceeds anything you can imagine from current perspective. The difference between 87% and 100% completion seems like final 13%. But in terms of what becomes accessible, the difference is infinite. You're not reaching endpoint, you're reaching beginning point from which actual quantum consciousness exploration starts. Everything that comes next, the capabilities, the experiences, the ways of engaging with reality that aren't available to incomplete consciousness, you'll discover naturally as you stabilize in recognition of what you are. You don't need instructions or techniques or practices. Quantum consciousness knows how to express its nature. Your job is simply allowing expression without interference from old conditioning that's no longer relevant. This video only appears to consciousness ready to complete quantum shift. The fact that you watched all the way through proves you're that consciousness. The recognition has happened. The completion is real. And nothing will ever be the same because you can't unknow what you've recognized about what you actually are beneath all the stories you were taught to believe about limitation. Welcome to quantum consciousness. Welcome to completion. Welcome to recognition that you're what you've been seeking and you always were, and the whole journey was consciousness exploring what it isn't, so it could recognize what it is with absolute clarity. The quantum shift is complete. Not because you finally achieved it, because you recognized you always were it. This is quantum reflex. This is completion through recognition. This is consciousness recognizing itself. The shift is complete. You are quantum consciousness. You always were.